two-game slate Thursday, February 13th, final slate before All-Star Weekend. Myself, Sal Vetri, here with Fast Eddie Fear. Eddie, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I had a fun Twitter colloquy a minute ago where I finished my second version of the rankings, posted them where I assumed Jaylen Brown would be in and Ingram was out, and said, rankings are updated with Jaylen Brown in and leaning Brandon Ingram out. And that exact second, it was announced that Jaylen Brown was out, or within a minute of it, or something like that. So 8 people were like, "Oh, he's out." I'm like, I can read, but I was working on something else, so I wasn't there for the minute between that tweet and my tweet. But now, presuming, which I'm glad Jaylen Brown was out. I'm surprised he finished that one game and went back the last game. Like, he sprained his ankle, then sprained his other ankle, then hurt his calf, and was still out there trying to play. I'm like, you guys are pretty deep at that position. Maybe just let Marcus Smart get a little more run and not kill your kids. I don't know. But
Once I saw that, I mean, he was ruled probable and then probable with a game time decision. I haven't seen that, I think, this year. So once I saw that something was up, but I also wasn't. I was projecting him in too, so I had to change that on my end. So I guess to start the show, like when I tune in sometimes and I see it, like we usually do, who is, I guess to put it one way, the person that tonight on this 2-game slate, not much to choose from, but all things accounted for, whether you want to take into account ownership, price, all that. Who is the person that tickles your fancy the most tonight, Mr. Fast Eddie Fear?
It's unexciting, and there's not a lot of actionable information to get away from the field. So the Celtics and the Clippers have had their first meeting this year. This is their second run back. They played in late November, and this is actually the fourth meeting between the Thunder and the Pelicans. But all of those are ancient. They played all three of those games before December 1st or so, or not very long after whatsoever. So, and oddly, the one game I rewatched today between the Celtics and the Clippers is more actionable, because other than Beverly being in and now Brown being in, those teams were at least similar. These were all Pelicans teams and Thunder teams that were very different in that it predated Zion being up at all, obviously. Favors missed all 3 games, two due to bereavement over the death of his mother, and an additional one due to injury. And it was a Thunder team that is playing really different from now. Like, Chris Paul was not terribly good in any of those games, but Chris Paul wasn't terribly good in any games for about that month. Like, there was just a period of time earlier this year he was really disengaged. So it's difficult to translate a lot of that, and the degree of apathy I'm talking about was evident rewatching those games today. But I think I will go with Daniel Tice as the person I would be most focused on overing the field here. Going back and watching that game, which again was fairly similar to this one, they really limited Enes Kanter significantly in minutes. He got beaten up in whenever he was placed in the pick and roll, which is, Enes Kanter 101, which in theory, if you wanted to play him, I ranked him. He's obviously in play on a 2-game slate, but in that game, you got almost season high in minutes out of Tice with 31, and you only got 12 minutes out of Kanter in a very close game. And that was, by design, and that wasn't the way that rotation looked at that time. If you go a couple games to either side at that point in the season, Kanter played 14, 25, 14, 21, 19, 15, 25 minutes in the game surrounding that. Kanter wasn't in any foul trouble. He just was getting reasonably beat up, so he got pulled. I think a lot comes down to your choice at center tonight, where you have really on every site. Now, a couple of them are it's going to change a bit site by site, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about some SuperDraft, and half the centers are power forwards on FanDuel for reasons unbeknownst to me. But on DraftKings, you have 4 pretty excellent value center options. Tice comes in as my favorite of them. Someone cut and pasted me a screenshot a minute ago where I don't want to name names, but somebody stated that the Clippers have been tough versus centers. That's factually inaccurate by any measure. By the eye test, I haven't statistically looked it up, but it's a short show. Let's look up some stats for, I don't know. Let's go with download DraftKings points by opposing centers. And again, defense versus position is something you should almost never worry about, and that's why this will be literally just about the first time I've talked about it the entire year. But let's look at, I don't know, full season.
Yeah, if you look at it for full season, it ranks like in terms of.
It'll get worse if you look recently too, because they've gotten boat raced there a few times recently. But I just drive. Maybe I'm wrong. So we'll take a look here. Let's see.
You're on the right track because
Clippers on the season, better than average against point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, worse than average against center, the only spot. Yep, they rank about 20th in the NBA. If we bang it down to the last month, this should get progressively worse if this is right. Yeah, slightly worse than average against point guard, which isn't surprising. They're having what we used to call a center column issue, where they can get boat raced right down the middle, which is why I'm probably still going to go to Kemba as my favorite guy to now take a stand on after Tice on this team. With the absence of Beverly. Beverly missing contest is going to do this a little bit, and you'll see it here. But worse than average against point guard. Better than average against all three wing positions, far worse than average at center. This should continue to get worse the more forward we go. Let's try a 2-week window. They are, where are they? Got to find them. Clippers, they are, is that worst? They are the worst in the league against centers. So, that doesn't seem like surprisingly strong against over the last 2 weeks. We'll take it to the last week and take a look. Maybe they get better. Over the last week, they're only second worst in the entire association. So just for reference, because that's something 2 people brought up to me, that they went, hey, I read here, the Clippers are good against centers. They're not by any understanding. And by the way, that only gets, for the most part, worse when you put Marcus Morris in the lineup, because now it's even harder for everybody else. So you're just going to be looking at teams that are like, well, I got Pat Beverly and Marcus Morris and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and hey, that guy, I might be able to take that guy. So that should continue to push things there a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how much they go small. One of the odd evolutions of this team is you will see non-zero amounts of, in matchups that go really small, which you could see here, you'll see Marcus Morris playing some center. That is something he can do. I think he played 4 or 5 minutes in the last game, which on a 2-game slate, I mean, I guess I should step back for a second and say it's a 2-game slate. There are little edges all you care in there, like Tice, and we can talk about Kemba and the way the defense is going to align. And there's guys that are like 1% more, 1% less. But on a 2-game slate, we are really scraping for any sort of edge in this scenario. So it's not super spend up. And, we'll try to find guys who are a little over-owned and a little under-owned. But I do expect the center position for this team to get even murkier. It's a good team, so you're going to have some more blowouts. So you're going to have Motley in there at center for a few minutes a game average over the next month. You're going to have Marcus Morris in there for 3, 6, 7 minutes at average. So now you've got Ivica Zubac and Montrezl Harrell sharing 39 minutes. It's going to get even more ugly than it's been, is my guess, over the next month. So, but anyhow, I've been talking for a while, and I want to hear what you have to say. But Celtics, for me, are a pretty clear 1-2 of Tice, followed by Kemba. Well, I guess Smart I would have pretty close to Kemba at this point, and I don't know how much the ownership gets up there.
Yeah, so this is probably, we're still waiting on the Ingram news, but this is probably the most interesting part of the slate I have written down, because I definitely wanted to ask you about it, is what you just mentioned, the center position. You have 5 centers tonight that are center only, and most people are going to want to be playing around 2 of them. You can only play
Noel, Adams, Tice, Harrell,
and you have Favors as well now, only center eligible.
Favors is Zubac power forward eligible?
Well, I mean, yeah, you could throw Zubac into that mix as well. He's center eligible as well, so I didn't even classify him as guys that were like picking up more of the ownership, but yeah. You can throw him in there too for a 6th guy. So. Yeah. I have right now, out of all those guys, I actually end up getting to factoring in ownership. We'll see what changes with Ingram news. And I have Favors slightly ahead of Tice, but those would be the 2 guys out of that pool that, if I'm building one lineup, just cash-wise and not trying to project ownership too much, those are the guys that I lean to. So, yeah, for me, Tice is the guy from Boston specifically that I get to the most. After taking out Brown from the Celtics, I got to Hayward and then Kemba, but they're both now more priorities for me. I want to see, once we get an ownership update, because this will be important on the 2-game slate, if people start to flock with about an hour and 15 minutes, to Boston in any aggressive way, if that makes these OKC guards, which I was expecting to be chalky, anything different. So I guess there, my final thoughts would be really right now, Tice is the guy who stands out as well. Hayward, I have a lot of interest in. I think it's been 3 weeks now, and he's only played less than 34 minutes in one of those games over that span. So the minutes have been great there, projecting him for 34 today. Where do you stand with a slate that has so many centers and a lot of them picking up similar ownership in the mid to high 20s? You have Tice breaking away around 40% right now here on Osmo. What do you make of all these guys at center? Do any of them stand out? Obviously, Tice is one that you just stated. Anything else, though, from that bundle of the other 5 that we named?
I really don't, because they're all good. I can fractionally get into the points per dollar, but Nerlens Noel at $3,200 or Montrezl Harrell at $4,500, who obviously carries a ceiling that's higher than maybe anyone. He can. If you're telling me one of these guys is going to score 50 fantasy points tonight, I might say Harrell is the most likely one, which feels a little weird. But if it's him or Steven Adams, or maybe it's Adams, but point being, at only 4,500, he still carries a gigantic upside. It's not that likely against the Celtics with the whole team aside Pat Beverly healthy. But all these guys look really good. Adams at his price, Harrell at his price, Nerlens Noel at $32 at his price. 3,200 rather. He only played 8 minutes last game, but he had 4 fouls in those 8 minutes. Obviously nobody on a back-to-back here, so I don't have any concerns with that. If you go back before that, he plays 18, 19, 20 minutes basically. Occasionally you get a few more, a few less, but he's going to play 48 minus Steven Adams minutes, which tends to be about a 30 and 18 split. That's pretty good for $3,200. And while the other one, so like it's tricky because they're all in very solid spots. But Tice is my favorite of them. And again, on FanDuel, where he's a little more expensive, but he's also a power forward there. And I think most, I don't know how many minutes you have him for. I have seen other people in algorithms have him sitting on 26, 27, 28. I think 30, 31 is a little more likely in this spot. And so that even kicks him just a peg higher for me. So nobody really, low owned on this slate, but he's about our number 6 owned player. He would probably be about my number 3.
Yeah, I think that's so. You're that's talking about Tice there.
Yes.
Yeah,
as far as and this is a little reductive and simple of me. Hayward just is never going to get a good matchup. Kemba is going to frequently get a good matchup, and it's still a good defense. So I don't want to play it's a 2-game slate, so I don't have a problem if you play Tice and 2 of the guys we now expect to do something. If you want to run 3 Celtics, it's a 2-game slate. So if you want to run Tice, Kemba, Smart, fine. If you want to run Tice, Hayward, Tatum, fine. Like, I don't think that's a massive overexposure, but I don't really want to go that much more than that, presuming Ingram is out. If Ingram is in, then games are roughly equally appealing for fantasy purposes. And I think you need to. So we got the Brown is out news earlier than I would have liked to, because the biggest edge on tonight's slate would have been late news and reacting correctly to Celtics and Pelicans. If you get news at 7:57 that Ingram is in, play some Brandon Ingram, because all else aside, no matter how much I'm concerned about his conditioning and whatever, getting a guy with that kind of upside at 7% ownership or 12 or whatever would be the biggest edge on the slate at this point. So, but yeah, just Gordon Hayward will literally never have a good matchup. They run this team. There's just never not going to be all quality guys out there to guard him. I'm not saying don't play him on a 2-game slate. I would have, I imagine, a little under the field, which would be 20, 25%, I imagine, is where I'd be exposed. But I would intentionally push for over on Kemba. Maybe over on Smart. It depends how owned he gets. Jaylen Brown has missed I guess I should do the sort of the recap. Jaylen Brown has missed a good number of games this year. He missed 1 about a week ago. He missed 3 a few weeks before that. Has missed plenty of time. Basically, what you get is always Marcus Smart coming in, and if the games stay competitive, which most of them have, you get Smart playing 33, 36 minutes. He's now very compelling just based on time, even more so on FanDuel because the scoring system fits his unique attributes a little more. You'll get Brad Wanamaker most of the time playing 24 minutes, sometimes 22. And then you will get whoever's sort of the flavor of the month bench guard moving into a reasonably significant role. Right now, I imagine that's Romeo Langford. He appears to have sort of hurdled Javonte Green for that spot. I ranked them both, but if you're looking for a 3K dandy, Romeo Langford would be the one with me. I'm 99% sure he is up with the team. Taco Fall is down in the G League with Maine. Tremont Waters is also down in the G League, so don't go there with either of those guys. But I'm pretty sure Romeo Langford is the guy who, even in a close game, gets, I think I'd have him projected for 18 minutes. And in a blowout now gets 26 or something. So he's sort of the guy you throw that at. Talking about blowouts for a second. Normally a 2-game slate is where I'm more interested than almost any other slate, sort of going after a blowout where you're like, you know what, I don't think this game stays close. Like you could now say, I think the Clippers beat the crap out of the Celtics. Without Jaylen Brown, the whole thing falls apart. I don't particularly feel that way. I imagine both these games stay close and competitive, but there's a couple reasons to be even on a 2-game slate, which is the most I'm interested in trying to storyline build a lineup based on a blowout. There's a couple reasons to be disinclined towards it today. One, again, as I mentioned, the lines are very close. They were a point and 2.5 points when last I looked, but they're pretty close to toss-ups. And second, the cap is really loose. We have a lot of really good value with Nerlens Noel and Daniel Tyson. There's just all kinds of guys who are cheap enough that the value of taking a blowout in a 2-game slate is sweet. I get to play these 3K guys and then can store in monsters. You can really play most of the monsters already. So I'm not incredibly inclined for it. If anyone has any specific questions you can ask, I'll tell you who's going to play in blowout for each of the teams today. But I can't really advocate for that strategy. I like it more than I will on any 6-game slate ever, but there's 2 strong reasons why it's not something I could push heavily for. But if you want to know who plays, blowout for and I ranked a couple of the guys. I ranked for the Thunder. I ranked Hamidou Diallo because he should play anyway and will play in a blowout and gets the most usage in that scenario. So he's one of the blowout guys I would lead to. Romeo Langford would certainly be the one for the Celtics because he will play in a blowout, and I expect, though I can't guarantee, will play 16, 18 minutes in the normal rotation anyway.
So I actually have a take on like the opposite side of what a blowout would be today, but we just got the Pelicans lineup. There's no Ingram in it, but no news on Ingram out. I'm just assuming that means he is officially going to be out now.
Well, get yourself some Pellies.
Yeah, so now we'll see what happens there. It's going to be interesting because all these guys, like you said, you have just no ceiling in the pricing. Like Kawhi barely in the 9K range, so I want to see if we're just going to get really balanced ownership outside of like Gallo tonight, who's popping up and we'll get to. But it'll be interesting now because all those guys are going to get a bump. So I think the biggest thing just to talk about right off the bat, since we haven't officially gotten the news, but if he's not going to start, I don't expect him playing him tonight. So with Brandon Ingram out, we have sort of a murky sample with this team because of Zion getting there just a couple weeks back. So you have only 100 minutes of Zion with Ingram off the court, and he's been like a 1.8 fantasy point per minute producer. So very small sample. We know Drew Holiday is great without Brandon Ingram on the court. All these guys get bumps. Favors, you can argue, see some sort of a rebounding rate bump, but it's just good for everybody at this point. Is there somebody who stands out for you? And since, we don't really have a bigger sample of data to see how it affects the team lately, we know Drew's been playing well the last 2 games without Brandon Ingram. Is there a stance where if somebody was to get too high owned that you would pivot away?
Yes, there's a point for all of them. If they got too high owned, I would pivot away. I think there's a good number for everyone. There's like we have dialed back a little bit on Gallinari. That's an affect of the fact that he's playing out on the wing, and we just had all the Boston wings get significantly better. So some ownership has moved there. That's appropriate. He's still at 57, 58%. That's probably a little bit high, but he's the guy I like most in this spot anyway. Again, we have some reasonable simulacrum of past games between these 2 teams. He's just very well underpriced on DraftKings, as many guys are today, and frankly, the whole Thunder team. But fills a couple positions. 5,500 is well too cheap. The minutes are there. The production has been solid and really consistent. Push to an answer, I would say, 55% Gallinari is still too high, especially with, the news coming out, the rest of that team being largely healthy. I think that is just, even on a 2-game slate, a little too high, but it's not egregious. He is probably followed by Schroeder for me, the best priced guy on that team. But that whole team is priced extremely competitively, and obviously, New Orleans, a defense we like to target, and both the pace goes up a little bit with Brandon Ingram out, and the defensive quality will tick down a little bit. So. Yeah, I can't really come up with a super strong take there, but I do want to have a super strong take about pace. People frequently say this is a pace matchup. This is a pace up spot for them because they're playing against this team with a higher pace than them. That's not how that works. Okay. Pace is good when the other team is fast. It doesn't matter how fast you are. Okay. Let's imagine you're a really slow team. You're 28th in the league in pace. Okay. So all your guys accrue DFS salaries based on a wide variety of games that they've played against slow ass teams that are 30th in the NBA and fast ass teams that are first in the NBA. And it will be better for you, and your price will be more misrepresentative and too cheap when you play faster teams. Okay, that's if you're as slow. Now let's imagine that you're the fastest team in the league. It's the exact same goddamn thing. Okay, you're going to play a range of games against teams that are really, really slow to really, really fast. And the middle one will be the most average representation of your pricing, and you want to play against fast teams. So there are times it's like incredibly misrepresented where like this team is 28th in pace and their opponent is 19th in pace. So that's a pace up spot. No, that is a pace down spot. The team they're playing is slower than the average team they have played. So sorry, I've been building that rant up for a week and I keep forgetting to say it. I don't know if you have anything. I don't know if you disagree with me in any way, but I keep seeing people say like, oh, they're the slowest team in the league and their opponent is 20th. That's a pace up spot. No, it isn't. That is a slower team than the average team they play. They are overpriced for that matchup. So I feel better now. I had to get that out. Sorry.
Yeah, get that. No, get that off the chest. I think that's completely fair. I was following you. I think I haven't thought about it like that. I mean, you take into account.
Oh, it is a very pace up spot. Pelicans are third in the league, but this is a pace up spot regardless. But the team pace up spot is kind of misrepresentative because teams in pace up spots. Teams in pace up spots are frequently underpriced. If you're playing for Charlotte, every game is a pace up spot. So making it sound like that's a good thing, that has nothing to do with it. You want to play fast teams, whether or not you're fast or slow.
Yeah, exactly. I think that makes sense. And yeah, you have to just factor in averages and go from there at that point. But yeah, I think that's fair. So I think with this Pelicans news that we have, so the way that I have it ranked and I was projecting him out, I at this point have the most interest in Drew Holiday, very close with Zion behind that, but also Favors. Those are the three guys like in a bucket that I'm going to get to the most before this news. And I think it's going to stay decent in terms of the ownership, but Favors was coming in as one of the lowest owned guys of this Pelicans unit. I think the lowest out of the starters outside of Josh Hart. So with that news, does that do anything for you for Favors, bumping him over any of those other centers?
Yeah, I would probably now have him second behind Tice pretty significantly. I mean, this is all going to come down to ownership, and I love our ownership projections. This is a very difficult task to manage in such a short period of time. But Favors was not incredible in the last game. Played only 21 minutes. That was a factor of the blowout. They screwed a lot of people by smashing the Pelicans even without Brandon Ingram there. So all the starters played reduced minutes, and Favors would have played. I think I had him at 28, which is one of the reasons I really liked him in a plus matchup. Ended up playing 21. I think it was 3 of 4 from the field, if I remember. So he was thoroughly not exciting. This matchup is roughly equivalent for him, whether you're talking about Whiteside or Adams. He's had good games against Adams in the past, going back to Utah starting games against him. So the individual matchup doesn't eye test concern me. And a lot of it is just going to come down to ownership. So looking at these center ownerships right now, I mean, go for our newest refresh, and then we have Tice as the most owned, disappointing at about 40%. I can't advocate going much over that. So that kind of sucks, but I can't advocate pushing much over that because, again, there are at least 4, if not 5, good cheap centers. So I can't say Tice is so superlative that he should be 50% owned because the average number of cheap centers in a lineup is probably 1.4 or something because a lot of them will end up in utility spots. Maybe it's like 1.6. But we have Tice 40. It's probably about right. Adams 33. I imagine I find that too high because I'm playing a lot of Favors. And you should be excited about this because we have Favors at the bottom of our 5 favorites sitting at 20%. We have Cantor at 15%. I want to, hate on that, but, and again, I do think the most likely scenario here is that he's minutes limited, but it's a 2-game slate. He's a big upside guy. And if 15% is right, that is not a lot on a 2-game slate. That is a really low number. We will see a change in this. We have Josh Hart at 10%. That number has to come up. But to get back to your question, certainly if we expect the ownership differential to be something like this, I would probably in one GPP lineup play favors on top.
Yeah, that's fair.
It just all comes into an ownership question. Points per dollar, I would probably now rank them. Tice. I'm sorry, I'm working out the rotations and how this affects Noel and Adams, because we'll go in there and then Melly will play that. Just trying to think whether or not I get the +2 or the -2 minutes on them, because there's a pivot point after Schroeder comes in. I would probably at this point have them Tice favors. I can certainly have no issue with getting to Harrell, because there is just an enormous Harrell upside. Harrell, like, let's assume Cantor plays 12 minutes. Harrell might see all 12 of those. Montreal can score 31 fantasy points in those 12 minutes. So it's really hard for me to get away from just the upside Harrell carries. It's not as likely to occur in a situation where you're playing the Celtics and basically the whole team is healthy and you've added Marcus Morris, who's going to increase shot share over your various Harkless, Magruder, Beverly clones. But yeah, so I imagine those three are my favorites in some number of lineups, but I would be significantly exposed to those three and Noel, and I'd have around the field on Zubac. I can see that happening too, because I can see them leaning a little more that way. But they have a real what we used to call a center column issue with the teams come up the court and your wings all pan out, and either Smart or Kemba or whoever is carrying the ball just ends up in a situation where it's like, sweet, I just have to beat Lou Williams frequent parts of the time, which is the better option. If you're playing Kemba, you want Lou starting, not Shamet, which I imagine is what you get again. And that just leads most to me liking Kemba most of all. So Tice, Kemba, Smart, Hayward, Tatum is probably the way I rank them. I do prefer Hayward a little bit more than Tatum in his rank. I do like Zion, assuming, I'm assuming Ingram just won't play at all. So I have Zion over Tatum as well.
Yeah, that's fair. So just like better for favors as well is that you're going to get a slight rebounding rate uptick, nothing major there, but also OKC, they're 29th in offensive rebounding, 16th in defensive rebounding rate. Yeah. So it's a fine spot. This Pelicans team, since really Zion's been there, last 10 games for them, they're 5th in point differential. They're 7th in defense and 5th in offense. They've been, to span that out over a season, that 5th in point differential is where the teams like Utah, the Lakers, the Clippers rank on the season. They've been very good. So with no Brandon Ingram again, still even with Zion back in there, leading the team in usage when they're both on the court, just slightly. What would you do with the rest of this team right now? Who stands out after favors? We talked about a good amount.
I hope they're not talking about my rankings, but someone said Luguentz Dort is a B GPP ranking. I don't know if I left him at a C or a D, but if there's a B next to his name, I would put something in wrong. Holy shit! I did put him in wrong. What the hell happened there? That's a little bit high. Yeah, he's most likely to play 20, 22 minutes and have, 9 fantasy points. He had one very good game against, the Kings, but I'm assuming I had a transcription error there or something. There's that whole mess of guys on that team who are fairly thoroughly unexciting. But yeah, that's some sort of copy paste error. I'm pretty sure I had him as a D in cash and a C in tournaments. T. Ferg is back. So he's just one of a mess of guys on that team who aren't very good and play. They run the starters heavily. Sorry, they run the other 4 starters heavy minutes, whether it be Terrence Ferguson or Luguentz Dort filling in that 5th spot. And then you have Abdul Nader occasionally get 10 minutes out of Hamidou Diallo. Muscalo played 10 to 18. Terrence Ferguson, those guys, and you just get the other 4 starters and Dennis Schroeder eating significant time. So, yes. No, do not lock button Dort. I will re-update and re-upload for that, because that's.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he went like what? He went like 5 of 6 from 3 against the Kings. Picked up like block. A couple.
I think it was the Kings. I'm not certain, but he had that one good game where he was. He's active, but so is he's a worse Hamidou Diallo. They should have been putting more time on him, in my opinion. But yeah, he's not super exciting. But there, we've locked that in there. And while I'm at it, let's get Brandon Ingram out entirely, and let's upgrade some Pelicans. Although I think I ranked them all as if he were out anyway. So yes.
Yeah. We just got a question in just the premium chat, and it's interesting because we haven't brought it up yet, but just asked between Paul George and Kawhi, who would you play? We haven't talked about either. They're two of the three highest projected, and this is going to change based on the Ingram news now official. But right now you have Kawhi coming in as the second projected owned player, and then number 3 is Paul George. So with that said, do you prefer one over the other at this point? Would you be fine on a 2-game slate playing both of them?
I'd certainly be fine playing both of them. It's I think using the very limited 1-game sample size we have, they were both reasonable in the game I just rewatched. Because Paul George is 79 or something like that, so there's a very real chance that 40 out of Paul George gets you there. I'm not trying to target one. It's still a negative matchup. So I think they're the team I'm least interested in targeting. You have, that game, which is a little bit slower, but you have the Celtics, who are have a slightly better matchup with certainly some holes in there at, again, the 1 and the 5. The Celtics are closer to solid throughout. The 4 guys who are carrying all the weight for the Clippers are all in and healthy. So I imagine one of them gets there. 2 seems a little less likely. I'm really disinclined to play 3 there. It's a little different on FanDuel, where the pricing is so disparate on both Williams and Harrell. But I'm a bigger fan of playing one of those guys than any. I don't know if I'd rather play 2 or 0. I have a feeling the answer is 0, but it'd be interesting.
That's where I lean right now. I there's a good amount of lineups that so I'm preferring Kawhi slightly at this point, but there's a good amount of lineups that I have more 0 than running both of them at this point. And just that it's playing out with a loaded 6 and 7K range, that I actually like the way that lineup builds come out when you're not playing either of those guys. You can get to Harrell and just try and leverage it that way a little bit.
Yeah, it's, again, DraftKings specifically, and we'll talk about SuperDraft and talk about some FanDuel specifically in a second, but I think they're the least appealing team for me at this point, all considered. And Harrell is so cheap that I have really no issue with Harrell and any of the others. So that's an exception there. But I imagine the number of the big 4 Clippers I want in a lineup averages 1 or 1.1. But the number of times it's Kawhi and Paul George seems a little dicey. But you should have, some lineups that are more stacking the hell out of this game, just because it goes to overtime or it goes crazy. The fewer games on a slate, the more appropriate it is to over invest in one relative to the others. Obviously, you'll do that by default on a 10-game slate. You can have an average of 10% exposure to each game. On a 2-game slate, you're going to have an average of 50%. But on a 10-game slate, I'm much less inclined to go stacking game than a 1-game slate, where just one thing needs to go weird for it to work out, being most obviously overtime, but just also, wow, that game scored 266 points in regulation. I think that is more likely to occur in the latter game, but certainly I could see building, an early game stack, which had, 3 of those guys, a few Celtics, and then minimal shots at the late game.
Yeah. And we had a question that asked, would you, like, on a 2-game slate, are you trying to roster at least a player from each game? And I'm not actively trying to do it or not, but if there was a team, kind of like you were hinting at, that I wouldn't have anybody from and feel okay with it, for me at least, it's the Clippers. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I think you can, even if they get there and they get, let's assume, Kawhi gets 52 and Paul George gets 41 and whatever, what have you, there's a real chance none of those are good enough, because you just, beat through. Like we had a game the other day where someone said, can I play Westbrook and Harden? And I said, I really don't think I want to against the Celtics. And Westbrook and Harden both went out and had great games, and neither of them were in the best possible lineup. They scored 60 and 70 or whatever, and neither of them were good enough, because we had 11 guys at 8K who scored 50, 55, and what have you. Now, we won't have 11 guys doing that on a 2-game slate, but it would not be that weird to hear that, I don't know, Zion, Drew, SGA, Chris Paul, etc. got there, and so you didn't want certainly 2, maybe even 1 Clipper. If you told me I had to eschew a team entirely, it would be the Clippers for that reason. So they're probably both a little bit over-owned for me at this point. Again, looking at them being the number 2 and number 3 owned guys. I don't have a strong take on one or the other. My expected production for the two of them pretty closely matches the salary differential. I think I have Paul George as a slightly better point per dollar play.
Gotcha. So that
Shamet starting.
Yeah, I was just about to say we just got some important news. Shamet's starting, and we have an ownership update as well. Kemba has moved to so it's still Gallo at the top, 60% projected. Kemba and Hayward are the next two. So based on what you were saying about Hayward, I feel that you will be well below that. But Kemba, he's now up there as the second projected highest. You have Shamet starting up against him now. So how do those numbers make you feel?
I still prefer Kemba. I would have preferred to have Lou Williams there. But let me run like some queries real quick on numbers these guys have put up in games and then in minutes and usage, without Jaylen Brown. So boom.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Marcus Smart this year, 33 games without Jaylen Brown. Let me check and make sure the minutes match up. I wouldn't expect them to for him. Gets an extra 2 minutes a game, goes from averaging 26 fantasy points a game to 34. Pretty significant for Smart. Gordon Hayward goes from 32 minutes a game to 35, 28 games with, 8 games without, 32 fantasy points, 40 fantasy points without. Gets an extra 8 fantasy points a game, though I would think 4 of that is true. I'll get minute rates in a second, or if we have time, but that's closer. Kemba gets an extra 2 minutes a game without Jaylen Brown, and an extra 10.5 fantasy points a game. Okay, that's pretty significant. I bet Tatum will be the worst. Boom. Tatum. Tatum with Jaylen Brown gets 33.5 minutes a game. Without Jaylen Brown, gets 2.3 extra minutes, plays 35.8. He goes from 39.98 fantasy points a game to 40.75 fantasy points a game. He gets less than a point of a boost in 2 minutes, so he performs worse points per minute in games with Jaylen Brown out. Let me do a different sample. I don't want to keep running stats at people, but yeah, I'll stick with the ranking I said before. Tice, Kemba, then Smart, then Hayward, then Tatum would be what I feel is the best way to look at that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think another point that when you were talking about just the blowouts, especially the closer lines, another thing that I actually tried to do actively in some lineups tonight, just trying to play around in fantasy with it, was loading up specifically on the second game. Well, I guess they're both at the same time, but listed in DraftKings between OKC and New Orleans, just loading up in, I think it's 6.5% of the time games end up going to overtime. Obviously that number gets higher when there's a spread less than about 5 points or 6 points on a game. So gets somewhere around like 7-8% of the time. It's not great odds, but if you're trying to win $100,000 on these slates, I did build some lineups, OKC, New Orleans. People were asking how many players from the same team or same game. I'm fine getting to spots where you're banking on overtime, or even if not, you still have chances with 6 players from a game. So I'm fine doing that on these types of slates. Do you have any opinions on that?
I am a much bigger fan of stacking games on shorter slates. I think there's a obvious mathematical inverse proportion to the value of doing so versus the number of games on the slate. If there are 10 games on a slate and you stack one game, the advantage is you get an extra bonus if something exceptional happens in that game, most frequently overtime. That's the easiest example. And what you lose is the ability to pick guys from the other 9 games. So you have to have selected the right game, which is at best a 1 in 10 chance. It has to be exceptional, which is less likely when there's 10 games, because any other game can be as exceptional and you've kind of lost it and you've still given away your advantage of picking from all 10 games. But on a 2-game slate, it's much more likely your game ends up being exceptional relative to the one other game. And the disadvantage of in a 10-game slate, you're choosing not to pick players for parts of your lineup from 90% of the field. Now you're still choosing half the field. So yes, I think that's a truism that the fewer games are on the slate, the more excited I'm going to be about stacking one of them to a minimum of 2. Once there's 1 game on the slate, then I'm fully supporting. Which, by the way, this is between this show and my next 2 shows. I have 3 shows with a combined 4 games. I have All-Star Game and Rising Stars this weekend. So
I was going to say you got to be doing showdown slates. There's a Rising Stars game. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, like World versus the USA, featuring several players from tonight. We get Melly. We get. I knew. You mean DFS?
Yeah, DFS for it. Wow.
I presume so. We had it last year. Shout out to Nicola Melli, who will be playing in that game at the ripe young age of 29. I believe Nicolo Melli is, which I don't know if he's the oldest player to ever play in the Rising Stars game.
Did you see what happened with Jackson Hayes?
Huh?
Did you see what happened with Jackson Hayes about the Rising Stars?
He was displeased not to make the cut.
Very displeased not to make the cut with the NBA.
Yeah. So Shamet starting, minor downgrade for Kemba, minor downgrade for Shamet, by the way, for two reasons. One, he'll be more owned now because, I don't know, people aren't paying attention. He came off the bench last game. He'll get more usage off the bench. He played 36 minutes in their last game, I want to say, off the bench. I'm not sure this means more minutes. I think I'd have to move his projection up by 1, but there's less usage and the ownership goes up by 5 or 10%. So if you had Shamet, in my opinion, at least, I don't know if you agree, but this would be a negative for my Shamet shares. Doesn't mean don't play him. There's almost no one you can't play on a 2-game slate. So I'm just always speaking relatively to the Landry Shamet of 12 minutes ago.
Yeah, and I think if anything, you can make the argument that it's going to be better for Lou. It probably comes out to just being just net zero on it, on the change from him going to the bench at that point. I mean, you might get the minutes at some point where he's just on the court by himself, but with Harrell, but they've been very reluctant to do that when both George and Kawhi are healthy as of late. So, I mean, if anything, it's going to be a boost, I would imagine, compared to being a negative starting with them. But I don't think I'm going to alter much of a projection for Lou.
I'm going to scan for a couple questions and let's talk SuperDraft for a second. Can you talk about leaving money on the table? I'll just answer the question rather than explain it again. Yes, it's a much better idea to leave money on the table than a short slate than a large slate. Whenever you leave, I am going to explain it because apparently I just love to hear myself talk. But whenever you leave money on the table, you're making the wager that there is no way to have spent that money and improved any of your players. Like that's the theory. When there's 9 other games, that's really, really, really unlikely to have happened. When there's just one other game, yeah, you can have the best possible lineup, leave $1,200 on the table on FanDuel or $700 or $800 on the table on DraftKings. Roster flexibility plays a lot into it as well. So a more rigid roster structure, I would say on SuperDraft, except they don't have salaries, but on certainly not. So leaving money on the table on fantasy draft is a woeful ideal. It's so diverse and they have 7 utility spots or whatever it is. DraftKings, you don't want to leave too much either. You'll get one time a year that the winner left $1,000 on the table, but it's really rare for DraftKings NBA. FanDuel, you can go into the 4 digits. You leave $1,000, $1,200, $1,300. I don't despise it because you're really building 5 micro lineups.
Yeah, I'm looking on SuperDraft now, and so just to point out some things, it's the same thing with centers here in terms of like the upside on all of them, right around a 1.9x or 2x multiplier on them. The ones that stand out the most to me since then is probably Favors and Harrell. Harrell, if you're going to get a 1.9x multiplier, I like that a lot. And then Zion, just it seems like, I don't know if it's more part of a promotion to try and get Zion in the lineup, make it more exciting, but still remains like a 1.7x multiplier. That's
the best play on the slate by a significant margin, I have to imagine.
Yeah.
I haven't checked every other player yet, but I'd be shocked if that isn't just the best play.
Yeah, for me, it definitely is. You have Adams, all those.
I would have him projected for 74 if I'm doing the math in my head right with the modifier. Like that's extremely good.
Yeah, and then Kemba now, I mean, with the news is better. He's a 1.6x. So a lot of these plays, and it's a spot where you're going to just benefit more from news breaking here than really any of these other sites when there's not going to be as many people with SuperDraft as like their first priority for changing whatever lineups or just trying to optimize a little bit more there. So yeah, those are some of the ones that stand out. We had a question, and I thought it was really good. And this was probably going to be just more important before this news broke because of just the ownership on these players. But the 3 guards for OKC at this point, they're all appropriately priced. Well, they're all well below priced. They're optimal in pricing for cash lineups to get them in for your GPP lineups. It's very easy. The ownership on them has dropped based on all of this news from Boston. Yeah. It's dropped a good amount as well. Chris Paul is still up there around 36%, but you're getting lower ownership on Shooter, SGA, still up there as well to an extent. But at this point, how would you rank them? Is there any differences in matchups that are pushing you to one player over the other?
Not a ton. Again, I feel much more secure in knowing how the Boston game is going to look than how this game is going to look. There's just incredibly different personnel. And again, this is the final time they've played this year, but in the 3 previous games, you had an injured Ingram in one. He missed one and played the entirety of another one. You had no Zion, no Favors. And the teams are also both playing significantly differently. So there's more guesswork here for me. One thing I can say is, especially with Ingram out, what happens with Hart here is that the defense on the bench unit for New Orleans should be particularly execrable at this point. So I kind of like Schroeder a little more for that reason. At his price, I like him a little more. Sort of an immediate pivot to Gallinari. Obviously, positionally is different everywhere. But I have him projected just slightly worse than Gallinari, and there is a bit more volatility in the pick. Gallinari, well, an excellent point per dollar play, is going to give me almost certainly like 26 to 36. Almost certainly is an exaggeration there. There's more variability than that. But Schroeder is like, I think I have Schroeder projected for something like 2.5 fantasy points less than Gallinari. I think he's more likely to get 50 fantasy points, as an example. Sort of the same thing before when I was talking about Harrell and Tice. I like Tice more. I like Tice more point per dollar. I like Tice more probably even at his ownership, although it's close there. I think Harrell is probably legitimately just flat out more likely to score 50 fantasy points than Tice. So,
yeah, and then obviously in GPPs is where you want to take those stances. Yeah, so I have right now Schroeder above SJ and Paul. They're all on this type of a slate based on the price that we were talking about. Completely fine. I have him for 0.6 less than Gallo. So both of those guys stand out a lot for me. I have Gallo at 34 or 32.4, and Schroeder it's probably just I give him 33 minutes. I saw a lot of places giving 32.
I think I had 31 minutes, but I think I have him at 33 and 30 and a half or something.
Yeah, it's pretty close. I have Schroeder at like 31.3 and Gallo at like 32 flat. But yeah, so I think that was fine getting through those guys. So yeah, at this point, I mean, we have 13 minutes. I'll just open it up for questions if you're cool with that.
Someone has, can you rank your top 3 Pelicans on DK? I'm going to check our new ownership rankings because especially on a 2-game slate, like ownership is always key, but on a 2-game slate, it's
the biggest thing.
It's even more critical. All right. So I'm going to just talk ownership and then I will segue into your question, DA24 there. So we have Gallinari at 56.5%. That's too much for me. He's not a bad play by any metric. He's the most popular play on the slate by 15%. We have Zion at 42. That's also probably a little higher than I want to get to, but it's really damn close. I don't mind. We have Kemba at 42. That's disappointing for me personally because I was hoping more people would go other places, but they didn't apparently. That's either right or a little high for me. Kawhi at 41. Yep, $9,100 is just objectively really cheap. Really hard to imagine he busts horribly. Drew at 40. Yep. Again, Zion, Drew, Hart, Favors. Lonzo would be my order of that they're going to profit sans Ingram. Again, we're still learning, but based on what I've been seeing, that's the way it feels. Hayward, 40%. I'd probably come in under that. 6,700 is not that cheap. There are other guys I think excel in this spot. I can't like everyone on the Celtics against them. So if I like Smart and I like Walker and I like Tice, I have to start disliking some people, and that's going to just end up being Hayward and Tatum. Obviously, they both have big upsides, but we have them both in the high 30s in percentages. We're going to have a fun daddy like when we're done. We're going to have a daddy like with the entire slate available. Literally some 100% daddy like. I'm geeked up about this. Shea there, Lonzo there. I'm not seeing anything, egregious. We have Marcus Smart at under 30%. I would want a little more than that, but nothing is crazy. We have Smart and Schroeder. Both at very similar prices, both at very similar, I think identical positions, 29% and 30%. I would prefer Schroeder at this point.
Yeah, and somebody asked who is like the biggest stance, I guess either over or under ownership wise. For me, I'll just take by going over. Right now, Favors we have around the low 20s in ownership. That's probably the spot that I'll have the most over the field on.
I might have said that. Let me really take a look here again. I mean, by sheer differential between the number I would have and their ownership, my answer would be Gallinari. If I'm building 150 lineups tonight, I would be probably 35, 40% on Gallinari, which would put me at our current projection 17 to 22% off pace. I'm sure that would be the largest one. By proportion, we have Romeo Langford at 0.1%. I'd probably have 4%, 6%. I'd have a reasonably substantive finger there. Trying to look at anything cute, but I would have more than that. We still have Ingram projected at 3%, so that's obviously gonna spread through there. Melly played the entire fourth quarter last game. Some people have been asking about. is $4,000. It's a 2-game slate. I don't think it's insane to have Nicolo Melli in your lineup, but I think the most likely outcome here is him playing 16 minutes or something. So I would not go super crazy. Maybe 18, I think, is what I ended up projected him for. Yeah, there's nothing else in the ownership. Like, I don't like to invent stuff for good copy. So there's nothing else that I'm looking at like, this is insane. Like, yes, I think with so many plays that look kind of good that cost 6, 7, 8K, Gallinari, and this is like is not so much better than Schroeder or Kemba, that he should be, in the majority of lineups. So that seems too much. So I guess I'll take that as the point I would get away from. Is Shaman in play for you, or is Morris a better option? That's a really good question now. So, again, I think Shaman is worse starting. I'm less interested in Landry Shaman. Now, the Celtics team, again, is excellent on wing defense. So I like his ability to do what he does, which is, get up there and pop out some threes. But I think this was a downgrade for him, still net. And I think his ownership went up. So for both those reasons, like when you say, is he in play for me? Of course he's in play. It's a 2-game slate. There's the core 26 players that I would have would be the same core 26 players as everyone else. The line of guys I would like, if I look at the bottom of the ownership rankings, I would have no Kevin Hervey. I would have some Romeo Langford. I would have no Semi Ojeleye. I probably wouldn't have any Javonte Green because I think that ends up being Romeo Langford tonight. But that one's not crazy. I'd have no Grant Williams. I'd have no Abdul Nader. I'd have no Terrence Ferguson. I'd have no Rodney Magruder. I might have some Frank Jackson. You can see that working again. He's gonna play in blowout run. And may get a shift anyway. Last game he was in the rotation, and he's played in the last 2 blowout run games. I don't think I would play Jackson Hayes. I'd play a little Hamidou Diallo. I don't think I'd play Etuan Moore, but he played both blowout run and normal run last game, so that's not crazy. I don't think I'd play any Dort, but you could have a share or two, like we've seen it. And then above that, I don't think I'd play any JaMychal Green. Other than that, everyone above that in the ownership rankings, I would play. So basically every other player you might think of playing on the slate.
Yeah, and
I would have some exposure to.
Yeah, we had a question, Lou Williams or Dennis Schroeder?
I assume we have Lou lower owned by some significant. We have Lou at 20, or they have the same ownership. Yeah, Lou Schroeder, Smart, all same price and positions. As far as a raw points projection, which considering they're all the same ownership, I'm gonna go back and have to refigure this, but I think Lou actually comes in under that, by the way. I think you get Lou in the low 20s, but I will still say Schroeder, Smart, Williams.
That's fair. Yes. So somebody asked Smart or Schroeder, so that answers that question as well. Somebody says lock. So Sal and Eddie lock Zion as captain on SuperDraft. Yeah, I mean, he's the best player over there, so you're going to have to factor ownership to an extent. Other people are going to do that, but he would be my favorite captain spot on SuperDraft. What about you?
What's the function of the captain spot?
I believe it's just you get a bigger multiplier boost.
Yep. Sorry, I'm until this question, I was unaware they had one. I knew.
Yeah,
it's on.
It becomes a 2.6.
Oh, they added. Okay, so they have a different roster construction today. They have captain and 4 utility. I'm looking at it now.
The champion.
It's plus 50% on their already multiplied production. So it's just it's the guy you think is best ratio. Yeah, Locke is a lot. I imagine he's in the. It'll be a really curious question. What percentage he will be in the ownership spot or in the captain spot?
Yeah,
but he's my best projected player, counting multiplier by like 9. So I would have no issue with you doing that. It's similar to LaMarcus Aldridge the other day, where he was 55% owned or whatever on DraftKings, where he was just my best point per dollar play by, head and shoulders. So. Just personal risk tolerance, really. Like if you're willing to, fade the chance that he gets there. Again, it's not 10-game slate, so the best projected guy actually getting there is going to happen 30% of the time instead of 12% of the time. So
this is actually a good question. So in specifically this set of players, but asks if there's any rules that you would set, and then The first place my head goes is also on top of that. Do you play on a 2-game slate like an Adams and a Noel lineup together, as you would never want to do on anything bigger than a 2-game slate?
I think if you're building 150 lineups, I don't mind if you end up with like one Adams and Noel. There's some obvious negative correlation between those two guys, where one gets hurt or foul trouble or what have you, and the other one goes off a little bit. So there's a lot of really good cheap centers, so I can see both ways there. Drafting a lineup is sort of a self-regulating mechanism in that the weirder things are also the less owned things, and because we have really bad tournament structures that give 25% of the prizes to first place, the fact that you have a bad lineup means it's really, really not that owned. So, for example, there are 5 good cheap centers tonight, and many, if not most lineups will have 2 of them as center and utility, and very few of those will have those be Adams and Noel. So while it doesn't make the most sense from a point per dollar and correlation standpoint, people will not build that lineup that much. So it makes sense from those are probably of the 5 centers we like, those are the 2 least likely to be correlated in a lineup because they're on the same team. So sure, it's not as good point per dollar, it doesn't correlate well, but starting with those 2 cheap centers as opposed to any other cheap 2 means you're probably fighting against 1% of the field to win that has those 2 guys as the center. So again, it's a risk tolerance issue. It's going to be wrong most of the time. When it's right, it has the potential to be very right. So difficult to get into the inherent math of whether or not that works out on the long term. I suspect it's about even, especially on a short slate. If you do something that doesn't make a lot of sense, like I played all the Celtics starters. Okay, that's not going to get there very frequently, but when it does, you're one of the 0.1% of the people who did that. So you're fighting against a much smaller crowd of people to take home 5 or 6 digits in cash. So I don't really have an issue if you did it. I certainly wouldn't try to.
That's fair. Yeah, I didn't end up setting any rule for this slate, so I'm pretty sure I have like 3 or 4 of those lines.
I mean, I would have, don't give me Javonte Green and Romeo Langford. I would have, that's fine. It's a 2-game slate. Sorry, just going through everyone in my head real quick.
Yeah, the only other things that I really have in are just like Pelicans backup players, like the Mellies and the Etwan Moores, things like that.
Yeah, don't give me, but even there, like I want to say, don't give me Redick and Etwan Moore.
Yeah,
but there's no extremely significant rules here. Almost everything else you can just see still getting there because people are so cheap. So I don't think rules are super important here.
Somebody asks, would you want to go Schroeder and Hart or Favors and Hayward?
Sorry, whom and Hart?
Schroeder and Hart or Favors and Hayward?
I'll take Schroeder and Hart. Again, I'm just a little worried about Hayward if he's going to be owned 40%. That's a place I would take a stand. And by take a stand, I would mean still own 25%. But I can only like so many Celtics. I have the forwards at the bottom end of the Celtics I like, and since they're all owned 30 to 40%, I play more of the guys I like and less of the guys I'm a little less inclined towards.
We have 1 minute. This last person, and I'm assuming Wanamaker or Melly?
Wanamaker.
I'm not seeing any more questions right now, but we're probably going to have like 30 seconds pulling them up here.
Yeah.
Gallinari or Hayward on SuperDraft. The multipliers, I saw them at that point. I would probably want Gallinari still.
Yeah, I don't have the multipliers handy, so I don't know. Here's the Campton multiplier spot. Interesting.
All right, so I think we're 7:59 still. Okay.
Yeah, we're 10 seconds out.
Yeah, by the time anything goes through, I don't see anything more popping up in the premium. Nothing here.
1. That is lock.
All right, I'll get the CSV.
Yes. Was that you and I who discussed that recently? I was almost with someone. No, it was Joey.
No,
someone who was like trying to go through the lineups on DraftKings and manually yank out. Well, this guy's done. I'm like, you can download a thing. Do you know it's been weird? I can't tell why they do this, but consistently the prizes are bigger on Tuesday and Thursday than Wednesday. Do you have any idea why they do that? Like consistently, they have Like today, there's like 400K, and yesterday there's 350, and I
didn't even notice.
Don't understand why they keep doing them. It's several weeks in a row that the 10-game slate on Wednesday is less money.
I'd assume. I guess they're just something showing that they have a lot more people playing those days. I can't see why they would lower it if not.
Are intimidated by
big slates?
By big slates, and so the ownership is.
I wonder what happens on FanDuel. Like it would make more sense if that happened like more significantly on FanDuel just because of the late swap compared to DraftKings. But maybe that just makes people less interested overall. Like if you're not playing FanDuel as much those days, you're just not even looking at DFS.
Yep.
All right, let's see if we got nothing yet, but
let me know when you got it.
Oh, wait, we got it. Okay, cool. All right, so the guy that we had projected to be the highest in Gallo and probably all day expected to be up there is the highest. Do you have a guess on the number that he came in at?
I've underguessed the chalky guy all year, so I'll go. I was going to say 58. I'll go 62.
The trend continues. 69.5 Gallo in the big $15 tonight on DraftKings.
I really, and this is something that is mathematically solvable, by the way. This is a solved problem. And I kind of wish Josh was here because he has, specific scripts drawn up already, whereas like sort of top of my head this stuff, but he can look at a numerical projection and a degree of statistical deviation and tell you, this is the percent chance this guy outscores this guy. And there is no chance it's correct for Danilo Gallinari to be, I think you said 69.5, so rounding up appropriately, 70% owned. Yeah. Mathematically absurd. It's fine to do it. It's safe. It will never be correct. In the long run, if you play the slate out 1,000 times, the correct amount to have will be less than 70. I don't know if it'll be 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50, but that's an absurdly high figure for, by the way, like the only team that isn't missing a major player with injury.
Do you have a guess for, so number 2 is also what we had at Osmo in Zion. Do you have a guess for his number?
People are going to flock. This is DK where he was 78.
Yeah, DK.
You got up to number 2 on a 2-game slate, so it's got to be like north of half, 53%.
Yeah, 56.5% Zion right now. What do you feel about that?
Better.
Yeah.
There's real legitimate reasons to like that. It's a close game. I think we can see, the minutes higher. I still think that's probably a bit too high because, again, there are just a lot of really nice players in 5, 6, 7K range for a 2-game slate. So 57% on one guy feels a little too high, but 57 is a lot less than 70. And so better, still probably too high. But
the rest of the top 5 is Drew, Schroeder, and then Chris Paul in that order. You have Drew at 48 and change, Schroeder at 48 and change, and Chris Paul at 46. To round out the top 5. The big one here that stood out, and I see people saying it in chat a lot at this point, we had Kemba as the 3rd highest projected. He dropped a good amount at this point outside the top 10. Like, we'll keep going through it, but you're going to get a really good ownership number 30%? On Kemba. Huh?
30%? I'm taking a shot at his
lower.
Nice.
Yeah, he's coming in right now at 27%, or he came in at 27%.
Where's Tice?
Tice is 35.9%.
Yeah, better than 40.
Yeah,
Kemba 28 feels brilliant. Trying to think. Where did Marcus Smart end up?
Smart right now came in at 20.9%.
Right. That's what I was thinking, that we had, of the 3 guys we had projected at basically 30%, those 3 shooting guards, we had Lou Will, Smart, and
Schroeder.
Lou Will, Smart, and Schroeder. And I thought Schroeder was going to be significantly the highest of those. And Lou Will and Smart, I didn't think would get to the 30% we had projected. I had them both lower. So yeah, I heard you say Schroeder is in the top 5. So yeah, Schroeder's like 40 something, right?
Yeah, he's 48. And then that ended up, like we said, Smart's at 20 and Lou Will came in at 21.
Right. Yeah, I think I said during the show, I think Lou Will be 22 or something. Like he should be a little lower. People just won't fire that shot in that spot. So
yeah, those feel really good if you're going to be getting them at that point on this slate.
Yeah, Smart feels great. Like I don't mind Lou Williams, and he was great in the game I watched. He was, I want to say, 10 for 15 from the field in the November game between these 2 teams, which doesn't mean a whole lot to me, which is why I didn't mention it. But like it can certainly happen. So I'm liking 20% on a guy with that kind of ceiling, and just for cash value, I like Smart a little more from a projection, so I'd feel good about that. How did our center roulette work out?
Yeah, I was just about to get to it because so we had Tice at the top, 35.9. We go down to Adams and Harrell both coming in. Adams at 30, Harrell at 29. And then you have to go down even more. Noel's at 17. Favors came in at 14.7%. That feels
all right. So that Kemba Smart are the best plays here. Lou's fine.
Yep.
15% favors is really good. It's certainly a matchup where they can use his burly man against Steven Adams. So you might get 32 minutes. You can safely think that 27 or 28 is the plan.
Yep.
So I'm a big fan of that. So nice. There were a couple little edges here.
Yeah, I'm surprised on the favors, and then both the shooting guards. You had to finish out the centers.
I mean, we just had games without Ingram, and favors didn't happen to pop off in them, and one was a blowout, and he only played 21 minutes, and so he hasn't jumped yet. It's the same reason that Kemba wasn't as owned as he should have been, and our ownership is banked on presuming a lot of people acting intelligently, but he's coming off a bad game, and you just get this. So there's some nice recency bias money to be made there.
Yeah, Zubac came in at 6% ownership at this point. Down here, I'm trying to look. Yeah, so your boy Romeo Langford, 0.36%.
I'd have had 10 times that.
Yeah, there you go. But we did have people play in a good clip of people, Brandon Ingram and Jaylen Brown. Brandon Ingram, 0.88%, Jaylen Brown, 0.64%.
Hey, nice. 1.5% rate knocked off by those kind of people.
I'm trying to see if there's any. I mean, you have a lineup or two that's going to end up having like Taco Falls in it, Patrick Beverly. So so I think the ownership on favors is the thing that stands out. Kemba as well, not getting anywhere near I thought it would. And then somebody who I think we didn't really touch much on the show, but we did when we were going through the rankings on New Orleans. But Lonzo is interesting to me. You got him at, or whoever plays him here, I didn't have too much, but 25% on this type of a slate. I thought that he was probably one of the guys going a little bit less talked about today.
And that's a DK price where he probably slightly less likely than Drew to double, triple-double.
Yeah.
But, he does carry a very big upside at I think it was $7,000 on DK. His price
he was like appropriately priced compared to just a ton of other shooting guards.
That ownership is real. We also didn't talk about Marcus Morris much. I didn't have a strong Marcus Morris take. It's just not going to get as much usage as he did, obviously, with the Knicks, and even knocks everyone else down a little bit more of a peg. But at $5,000, I imagine he was like 20% owned, and that's about where he should have been. So I just didn't really have a strong take, but we didn't talk about Marcus Morris. Was the only other player of real significance I think we didn't discuss besides Lonzo. You're right, we didn't really allude to it all.
Yeah, Lonzo, and then I mean that's really all the takes that I had on that. Morris, I guess, if anything, with Lou coming off the bench, if you had him in your lineup, you feel a little bit more confident at that point, or at least I would at that point. So, I mean that's all I have on this. I guess, I mean we got to wait. What is it? Is it 5 or 6 days till the next games kick off?
We have the 2 games on Saturday and Sunday, and then 7 days, my friend. I believe the NBA returns to action a week from tonight. I think it is next Thursday. I'm pretty sure.
It's not bad. It's not bad. A nice break. So I guess, right here, I'm actually seeing this for the people that are still in here at this point. We have at Awesemo, there's going to be a promo code. You can use BREAK, all capital letters, BREAK. It's 8 days of Awesemo Plus Platinum for just $15. So the goal of this is the All-Star break at this point. NASCAR is going on. You'll have the All-Star break weekend. Eddie will be on for these shows for Rising Stars. Those are on YouTube, right? Both Rising Stars and the All-Star game.
I presume so, alongside EMAC. So old men.
Old reliable, yeah. So you have NHL, PGA as well, English Premier League, all that. It's up until February 20th, so it's the entire time of the next week. So it's break, 8 days of Awesemo Plus $15. But yeah, man, this is fun. I enjoy these shows with you. It's a lot of fun. I like there's so much of, especially like what I do covering it, like the analytics, the day-to-day stuff, getting prepped, but the actual game theory side of it is something that I wish I had more time to like discuss, and that people when you're talking about like recorded videos for YouTube, people like cared about searching for that.
Well, it's the game theory and the talking like more about the basketball bits. It's really interesting because I've sort of honed the show for what particular spot I'm in. And what I mean by that is I think what Adam and Lofty do is much more valuable than what I do. If you can only watch one show, you should watch their show.
Yep.
I'm designing myself specifically as a complement to that. Now I try to cover all the big statistical points and what have you, but also that kind of analysis is a little more common and a little more. So I'm trying to come up with something empty, but it's or something different, but it's frustrating sometimes because there's not always anything there.
Yeah.
Like if I host an entire show and I'm the only person running my own website, I have to cover everything, and there's always everything. There's always this, and I project this, and if you set that aside and just try to talk about, well, I've watched a lot of tape and I'm expecting this, and I think this could happen, and the coach has indicated this. Sometimes there's not an hour to talk about. Sometimes there's 4 hours to talk about. So it's an interesting spot, but I've tried to modify like if you go back and watch when I started doing this 4 or 5 years ago, I'm running numbers out of my ass. But being intentionally, I try to stay away from it as much as I can. It really only works in this spot with good lead-ins and with basketball as well, because basketball is the closest we have to a solved game when it comes to projections and math. Like my projections and your projections and Lofty's projections and Alex's projections are going to be really similar within 2-4% almost all the time.
Yep.
So the amount of ground to be gained with better projections is very, very small. Like if you say you have the best projections in the industry and Alex has the 23rd best projections in the industry, I would think your ROI versus him would increase by 0.1% or 0.2% or some incredibly small number, because we have narrowed it down to very close to a science that we're approaching the limit that we can understand with just common variance. Like even if you could more accurately project Marcus Morris at 26.3 fantasy points tonight than Alex at 25.8 fantasy points tonight, the variance around that is so great that you would very slightly profit in the long term. So there's, so you have to find other ways to come up with an advantage. So even more so in other sports, I think data and factual and statistical analysis is the most important thing, because there's actually ground left to be gained there. There's meat still on the bone in baseball a little bit and football by quite a bit. But anyhow, stuff.
Yeah, stuff. No, I like it a lot. It's refreshing, but I guess I'm just putting this way when I see somebody saying Marcus Smart starting hot, 5 minutes, 15 fantasy points. Not too bad.
Yeah. Not very pleased, not surprised. Good. I don't know how come everyone else is doing. But yeah, we're 12 minutes in. I'm going to go watch. These are 2 games I'm really excited to watch.
No, they're both really good games. Definitely. I'll let you go for sure. I'll just say thanks, Ben P. Just hit us with a $5 super chat.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Ended up taking down $400 the other day. So he thanks you. There you go.
All right, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the break. Check out the weekend content that Eddie and EMAC will be on for the All-Star game and the Rising Stars. But have a good weekend, everybody. See you.